On January 23rd of 2005, tragedy struck the Myon family in the most devastating of ways. You see, Curtis Myon, he was a dedicated New York City firefighter, found himself trapped on the 4th floor of a blazing inferno in the Bronx. Now, alongside 5 of his fellow firefighters, Curtis had to face a very unimaginable choice. He either had to jump or be consumed by the very fire that he's fighting. Curtis and his comrades made the very difficult choice to leap from that 4th floor. Tragically, Curtis and another firefighter, they did not survive the fall. In fact, very sadly enough, on the same exact day, another fire elsewhere in New York claimed the life of a 3rd firefighter. Now, this was a day that was forever etched in the history of New York City Fire Department, marking the largest loss in life since the September 11th attacks. Left behind was Curtis's wife, Janette, and their 2 young daughters, Angela and Denine. Angela, a young teenager, and Denine, not much younger, they were absolutely shattered. See, for them, their world had been irreversibly changed. Their father was their rock. He was never coming home. Now, that Black Sunday tragedy, it was all over the news. Media, they were swarming to Janette's property, hoping for an interview or maybe a glimpse into the lives of those that was left behind. But Janette and her daughters, they wanted nothing to do with the spotlight. They felt trapped in their own home, which was a home that Curtis had built with his own 2 hands. Every corner, every wall, a poignant reminder of their immense loss. Janette, overwhelmed by the sorrow and constant reminders of Curtis, made a very heart-wrenching decision. She turned to her daughters and she said, "We need a fresh start. It's too much to stay here. Let's move." Now, little did they know, but leaving the physical house wouldn't mean leaving Curtis behind. The family was about to embark on a journey more terrifying than they ever imagined. Welcome to Retraced Echoes.
Hey there, listeners. If you're enjoying our spine-chilling stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. Your support helps us continue bringing you the best in paranormal tales and mysterious happenings. Don't forget to rate us wherever you're listening, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform. Your reviews and ratings help others find our show and join our community of fellow ghost story enthusiasts. We'd also love to hear your own haunting experiences. If you have a story that you think would be perfect for the podcast, head over to our website at www.retracedechoes.com and click on Submit a Story. Who knows? Your encounter might be featured in an upcoming episode. Now let's get back to the chilling tale of the Kendall family and the dark figure that turned their dream home into a nightmare. Brace yourselves for more spine-tingling moments.
Now, the girls, they wanted to leave those very painful memories behind. Janette, she started house hunting and soon found a charming little home on Long Island. Now, it was a little bit further from the city, but it was on an acre of land, which was pretty much a rarity for the price they were asking. The property had a lot of potential, but it also needed an awful lot of work. When Janette and her daughters visited the house, they could see that it was very worn down. It would need a lot of work to get back up to par, but you see, Curtis's firefighter buddies, they wanted to do whatever they could to support the family. See, for Curtis, he had been a very huge part of that firefighter community. They now want to give back to his family that is going through this immense loss. So they offered to help renovate the house, which gave Janette all the confidence that she needed to buy it. Now, with the purchase complete, Janet and her daughters quickly moved in. And true to their word, Curtis's comrades showed up in droves. They was ready to transform this old house into something that the family could be proud of. And they began a massive renovation. They was tearing everything down to the very studs and rebuilding it from the ground up. But the extensive work left many doors and windows unsecured. And as the days passed, the family's new start, it was about to take a very dark and unexpected turn. Unbeknownst to them, something else had moved in with them. Something that would soon make his presence known in the most chilling of ways. Now, anytime you purchase a new property, there's always that little bit of discomfort, not knowing the area, not knowing the people, not knowing what's around them. And at nighttime, that was Janette's biggest sense of having some form of an unease. But she was very much determined to protect her family, so she purchased 7 cameras to monitor the property. Now, each one of those cameras is streamed a live feed that she could pull up direct from her laptop, allowing her to keep somewhat of a watchful eye on their new home. Now, Janette, she would find herself oftentimes checking those very cameras. It was almost like a reflex. Kind of gave her like a sense of control, feeling of safety of watching the activity outside of her home from the very comfort inside of her home. One night, while her daughter's was upstairs, Janette grabbed her laptop. She pulled it over to herself. She typed in her username and password. She started looking at the various camera feeds. Now, she admitted it was somewhat fun and even a little bit comforting. Just sitting there and kind of staring what was going on outside of her home while in the safety on the inside of her home. Now, her attention, it was drawn to one very interesting camera feed. It was one that was on the very edge of her property. See, just beyond her property line was a tree line, and there was a swing set that stood near the driveway. Now, Janette started looking at that very feed when something very unusual caught her eye. From the tree line emerged a figure. It was a man in a cloak. In fact, he walked all the way up her driveway and then stopped and stared at the house. Janette was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she couldn't move. She was just sitting there watching, frozen in place as the figure stood there gazing at her home. Now, just as suddenly as he appeared, the cloaked man turned and walked back into the woods, vanishing right into the darkness. Now, Janette's heart, it was racing. What had she just witnessed? Who was this figure and what did he want? That little bit of safety that she once had was quickly dwindling away. Little did Janette know that this was just the beginning. The presence that she had just seen, it was a harbinger of terrifying events that was about to unfold, all within the walls of her brand new home. Now, Janette couldn't really believe what she saw. Her mind just wouldn't wrap around the entire concept and idea. I mean, the cameras weren't high definition, so in her mind, maybe it was just an animal or a glitch. Now, meanwhile, upstairs, her daughters was experiencing their own very unsettling encounters. Angela, the oldest daughter, she was laying on her bed, engrossed in a book. With her back against the wall, she suddenly felt and heard the tapping sound that was coming from the other side. Curious and a bit startled, she put her book down, and she leaned in a little closer to listen. The tapping intensified, kept getting louder and louder and louder, to where finally it was loud bangs, almost as though someone was desperate to try to get her attention. Angela sprung out of bed and rushed to her door. She wanted to try to figure out, was it her mom? Was it her sister? What was going on? So she opened up her door and she looked downstairs where she saw her mom, deeply engrossed, staring at her laptop screen. Clearly her mom wasn't the source of the noise. In her sister's room, it was all the way down the hall. Now, Angela was completely confused. If it wasn't her mom and it wasn't her sister that was down the hall, then what was the sound that she was hearing? It didn't make sense, so she returned to her room. She had almost convinced herself maybe it was just her imagination, but she wanted to be sure. So she walked up to the wall and she very gently put her ear against it, and she began listening. She closed her eyes and just listened for any little sound that she could hear. Angela was terrified. She ran all the way to her bed, and when she got to her bed, she jumped in and pulled the covers over her head. If anything, she was hoping and praying that whatever made that sound, it would just go away, that the sounds would just stop. Down the hall, her younger sister Denine. She was experiencing something that was equally as scary. You see, she had heard tapping too, but it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from her door. She thought it was probably just her mom, so she got up and opened the door to find that there was no one that was on the other side. So much like her sister, she went to the stairway and she looked down to see that her mom was still on the couch and still staring at the laptop, much like what her sister had seen. She looked down the hall and Angela's door was closed. Couldn't have been her sister. She, much like Angela, was completely confused, so she walked back to her room and she closed the door. The very moment the door lock clicked shut, she heard 3 very distinct taps on the door. She turned around and she opened it again, but there was no one there. Frightened, she ran back to her bed, and just like Angela, she pulled the covers up over her head. You see, the girls didn't know it yet, but these strange events, these were just the beginning. See, the house, it seemed to have its own little secrets, and the secrets, they were starting to surface. Now, the very next morning, Angela and Denine, they ran into each other in the kitchen, and they couldn't wait to tell the other one about the event that they had had happen the night before. If anything, almost like a sisterly warning of, hey, I had this happen. You might want to keep your ears and your eyes focused on what's going on. Angela began talking about how she was laying on the bed and she was reading a book, and all of a sudden she started hearing a tapping noise that was coming from the wall. Denine, before she could get any further in the story, she's like, yeah, I had a tapping too. It wasn't happening on my wall, it was happening on my door. Now, with the realization that it wasn't just them, as in them separately having whatever this event was, they both was having the same exact thing happening, and from 2 completely different parts of the house. For them, that was absolutely terrifying. Janette ended up walking in and seeing her daughters completely engrossed in this conversation. Concerned, she said, "What's going on? What are y'all talking about?" Now, both of the girls are completely terrified. They're completely on edge, and they start talking to Janette about the tapping noises. "Mom, we think there's something wrong with the house. We both heard this tapping noise that was coming from various parts of the house." They tried everything they could to explain it to Janette, but Janette just wasn't listening. She couldn't hear it. If anything, she was trying to calm them down. "Guys, it's a new house to us. We're not used to the sounds that it makes. It's probably like pipes or creaking floorboards. Don't worry about it. The house is completely fine." Over the following days, the firemen helping with the renovations, they began working on the basement. Now, this space was filled with clutter, almost as though the previous occupants had never taken anything out. There was old pieces of machinery and furniture, strange boxes and papers. The first step, it was just to clear it all out. Now, of all the crew that was there that day, Tom was one of them, and Tom was one of Curtis's most closest friends. While clearing the clutter that day, Tom made a very chilling discovery. You see, on the ground, beneath all of that mess, was a large pentagram, 5-pointed star inside of a circle, which is oftentimes associated with, if anything, satanic worship. Tom called down to Janet. "Janet, you got to come down here." And he showed her the symbol. "What do you want me to do about this?" Janet, she was horrified. She said, "Paint over it. I don't want my kids to see this." And what Janet did not know was that her daughters had been playing outside in the forest for the last few days. The same forest, the little surrounding areas that she was watching on her cameras. Now, what they had found out in the forest was numerous pentagrams carved into trees and rocks and even on the ground. I mean, the symbol was almost everywhere. The girls, they decided not to tell their mom, fearing that maybe, if anything, it would worry her. Now, both Janet and her daughters, they were keeping very unsettling discoveries to themselves, unaware of the shared danger they were in. The stage was set for a series of terrifying events that would soon engulf the Myon family. The house and its surroundings, they were harboring dark secrets that was just about to begin to reveal themselves. A few days later, Angela was home alone. You see, Janette gave her a few chores to do, one of which was to clean out the refrigerator, relatively easy task. So, Angela began by opening up the fridge and started taking things out. As she was doing this, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone that was standing behind her. She kept glancing over her shoulder to see if maybe there was someone there. But every time she would turn around and look, the kitchen was empty. That unsettling sensation kept growing stronger and stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling at all. Frustrated and ready to give up, Angela was about to leave the fridge, and she figured maybe she could just clean it later, when all of a sudden behind her was a very explosive sound. There was pots and pans and knives and forks. They were clattering violently on the floor. She spun around, and to her terror, she found that every cabinet and every door had been flung open, and their contents was scattered across the kitchen floor. Absolutely panicking, Angela sprinted up to her bedroom. She screamed and hid in the corner. Now, eventually, Janet returned home, and the sight of the chaos that happened on the kitchen floor, it filled her with absolute dread. She feared the worst. She thought that maybe someone had broken in. As she rushed into Angela's room, she would find her curled up in the corner of her bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably. "What's going on? What happened in the kitchen?" she demanded. But Angela, she was too shocked to explain. She could barely get words out. Janette was still thinking that there was an intruder, so she started checking around the house. She couldn't find anyone. She would look in every single room. Eventually, she would grab her laptop and review the camera footage, but no one had entered her home. So she returned to Angela. Janette was trying to understand what would have happened. All she was supposed to do was just to clean out the refrigerator. What would cause that kind of chaos, and then on top of it would have Angela huddled up in the corner of her room? "Why does the kitchen look like this?" she would ask. Angela, still terrified, she finally was able to recount the very bizarre story. Now, initially skeptical, Janette, she questioned if maybe Angela had caused the mess herself, but seeing that Angela was just absolutely uncontrollably sobbing and scared, she never changed her story no matter how many times she told it. She finally realized that maybe Angela was telling the truth. Now, for Angela, this incident, it would be a memory that she could never release for the rest of her life. You see, what happened in that kitchen left an impact. It left a huge impact on Angela because now this is the second major event that happened, and she never felt more alone than now. She was alone in her room when this happened, tapping on the wall, and then going back and putting her ear against the wall to have that slam against her wall, and then to be home alone, this time without Denine or her mom there. To have all this stuff happen, throwing everything on the ground, and then for Janette seeing that figure outside the home, staring up at her house, and then to come home scared to death, thinking the worst of what could have happened with an invader and her child, and then seeing this huge mess on the ground, and knowing that Angela at this point probably is not telling any kind of a story. This is not something that she would have done. A few days later, the renovation crew, they reached a new phase of their work. They began tearing down the drywall in the basement, and they uncovered hidden secrets in the wall. They discovered an old journal. It was wrapped in lace. One of the firemen, they would hand it to Janet and say, "Hey, you might want to take a look at this. This was found in your wall." So Janet opened the journal, revealing its age. The date on the first page was 1927, the year that the house was built. The journal belonged to someone named Christina, which seemed to be a young girl. As Janette read the journal, things took a very, very dark turn. You see, the journal was talking about sacrifices that was happening inside the house, both animal terrifying people. And according to the journal, the diagrams indicated that the rituals took place right in the very basement. In fact, the very spot that they were standing on. Now, Janette, she was horrified. She decided to keep the journal from her daughter. She didn't want him to know. She didn't want him to know about the dark history that had happened inside their very home. The revelations in the journal added a very chilling layer to their experience. In fact, the Myon family was living in a house with a very dark past, and the spirits of those sacrificed, they didn't want to stay silent anymore. They wanted to make themselves known. Now, a couple of days later, Angela was in her bedroom. This time she was listening to music, kind of relaxing for the day, when all of a sudden, she thought she heard someone say her name. But what was weird was, it didn't sound like it was coming from outside of her headphones, but it didn't sound like it was coming from her headphones either, so it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So she took her headphones off and started heading to the door. Opens the door and she calls out to her mom, "Hey mom, did you call me?" Janette responded, "No, it wasn't me." Angela looked down the hallway and she could hear her sister Denine, and she was showering in the bathroom, and it couldn't have been her. So Angela, who was still obviously scared about just a few days ago, she had that situation that happened in the kitchen. It was still fresh in her mind. It was terrifying. She returned to her bed, but before putting her headphones back on, she heard a voice, this time very clear, saying, "Get Denine." It was coming from inside her wall. Fear gripped Angela. At the same moment, she heard Denine's terrifying screams coming from the bathroom. Angela sprinted down the hall as Janette rushed up the stairs. As they would both rush into the bathroom, they would find Denine. She would be on the ground, screaming about someone else being in the bathroom. She's looking all around, saying that there's definitely someone here, but there was no one. It was just her. Janette was looking down and seeing the absolute fear in her daughter's eyes, and the first thought she had was maybe she had a seizure. So she grabbed a towel and she very quickly wrapped Denine in the towel, scooped her up off the ground, and took her into Angela's room. Janette felt helpless. You see, she had lost her husband, and now her children was being terrorized by something that she could not protect them against. She started feeling as though they had to leave the house. They didn't really have a choice, but financially, they were deeply invested. The renovations, the time, and the effort put in by Curtis's firefighter friends, it would make leaving almost impossible. And on top of all of that, how could she explain to anyone that this house is haunted? She felt trapped. She couldn't burden her friends with the truth, and she couldn't leave without letting everyone down. The weight of their situation, it was becoming unbearable. Now, days had passed. The tension inside the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Now, for Angela, Denine, and Janette, all three of them felt uneasy. They felt cooped up. They were scared of their own home. One night, Angela decided that she wanted to go outside and get some fresh air. In fact, she wanted to go swing on that swing set. So she went to her mom. Her mom was fine with it. She had to do dishes anyway, and the way the house was set up, it had a window that was line of sight to the swing set, so she felt safe enough. "Yeah, go ahead. Go swing on the swing set," she would say. So Angela would go outside and start swinging on the swing set as Janette would do the dishes. She ended up finishing up the dishes, and she's like, you know what? She's enjoying her time out there. I'm not going to call her in. She's going to grab my laptop. I'm going to keep an eye kind of on her. So she goes into the front room, grabs her laptop, logs in, and right there, as she opened the program, her heart froze. On the very feed that she was looking at, she could see Angela swinging on the swing set, and she saw the same cloaked figure that she had saw just a few weeks before, standing right behind her daughter. Janette would bust through the door, screaming for Angela, but before she could even reach her, she would hear Angela's terrifying screams. Turning the corner, she would see Angela laying on the ground, screaming in pain. cloaked figure was nowhere in sight. It was completely gone. As she would rush, she would look down at Angela's ankle and see that there was clearly something wrong. What happened, she would say. Angela, through her tears, would say, someone pushed me off the swing. They hurried to the hospital and they did figure out that she had broken her ankle. That night, Janette would review the footage. She would see the figure emerge from the woods, approach Angela from behind, and push her off the swing. Shortly after, it would rush back to the woods. Janette would call the police. She showed them the footage. The officers were sympathetic, but let's be honest, it wasn't high-def footage. On top of that, they can't identify whoever this guy is. They would just say, be careful. Don't go into the woods. If you ever see him again, call us immediately. Let us know. Janette was now in a constant state of fear. She couldn't protect her children. So from that point on, she stayed with them 24/7. They would all sleep in the same room. They would only leave during the day and only for brief periods. The Myon family's home, after the loss of Curtis, it was a place of hope. It was a place of renewal. Unfortunately, it became a prison of fear. The haunting presence, it was relentless, and Janette knew that they were running out of options. A little bit of time went by, and Janette needed to go to the pharmacy. She had to pick some stuff up. Angela, she decided she was going to stay home. Janette was going to be gone for about an hour to maybe an hour and a half. So Angela went to her room. She decided the best thing to do was probably try to distract herself by putting some headphones on, listening to some music, but it didn't take very long for something or someone to try to get her attention. Angela, while laying on her bed, thought she heard a sound, almost like a banging noise. And let's be honest, after everything that had just happened within the last few series of weeks, everything from the original tapping on the wall to the banging right next to her ear to the kitchen incident, and lastly, the swing set, she took her headphones off and she just started listening around the room, trying to figure out where the sound came from. It wasn't like the sound was constant. It would just happen sporadically. All of a sudden, she heard it again. It was coming from her closet area. She looks over and she sees the door is rattling. She was scared to death. The only thing she could think to do was to try to hide. So she very slowly slipped off the edge of the bed and she crawled underneath. She scooched up to the wall and pressed herself against it. Now she could see the bottom of the closet, and it was still rattling. Eventually, the door would slowly slide open, and from it, a dark figure emerged. Angela was paralyzed with fear, the room filled with a putrid smell. The figure looked kind of human-like. It had bare feet, but the form, it was dark and indistinct. At this point, it's walking around her room. She lay there and listened to the footsteps all around her, watching the bare feet as it would walk around her bed, almost like it was searching for her. Eventually, the figure wandered into the hall. Angela wasn't moving. She just laid there next to the wall underneath her bed, hoping and praying that it wouldn't return. Eventually, the house fell silent. She would just lay there listening. Is it gone? Is it really gone? It was not gone. The figure burst back into the bedroom, and then it would jump on top of her bed. She would feel the bed springs compress as it was climbing right on top. She would just lay there, knowing that it's there. Paralyzed, she couldn't move. She would just stare out the front of the bed. All of a sudden, from the top of her bed, looking down, was a rotting face that appeared upside down, staring directly at her. Angela would scream, and the figure retreated back onto the bed. She continued to scream, unable to see where it went. For the next 45 minutes, she lay there. She knew the figure was right above her. She could just smell that foul smell in the air. Finally, she heard her mom's car right outside. She screamed for her mom. Janette rushed into the house. She ran upstairs, calling out to Angela as she found her daughter underneath the bed, trembling and screaming about the figure. "He's in the house," she would say. "He came out of my closet," Angela cried. Janette searched the entire house but found nothing. The figure had vanished. Janette, at her wits' end, decided that they had to leave. They didn't have a choice. This was getting too close. It was getting too close to her, too close to the kids. It had already broken Angela's ankle. Now they're hiding underneath the bed. This has gone too far. She grabbed Angela. They drove and picked up Denine. Denine was at a friend's house, and Janette knew that that house was not an option. The Myon family had reached a breaking point. The haunting had escalated beyond their worst fears, and they were now left with nowhere to turn. Now, with Janette and the girls all loaded into the car, they go over to Janette's parents' house. They were desperate for any kind of help. Janette was informed about a paranormal investigator named Liz, and she thought that maybe Liz could help them with whatever was going on. So she connected with Liz, and she said, "Hey, I've got all these things that's happening inside the house. We really need your help. Can you get rid of whatever's haunting our home?" And Liz, she believed that she could. She believed that she could perform a cleansing of the home, confront whatever is the dark forces within. So she goes over to the home. She was informed that there was satanic rituals that was occurring inside the house. So as she goes through, she does a very intense ritual filled with chants and incense, and she was just determined to get whatever evil was happening inside this house out. Now, surprisingly enough, after the cleansing, Janette felt somewhat of a relief, and the house seemed to return somewhat to a state of calm. Somewhat unbelievably, especially considering the stories that we typically tell here on this podcast, Janette, Angela, and Denine, they all decided to stay inside the house. They felt as though Liz's cleaning had banished whatever demon was inside the home. Now, to this very day, the Myon family, they still live in that house. Terrifying events that had plagued them, they don't happen anymore. Their house, once filled with fear and dread, it's now the original place of peace that they had hoped for. Now, the haunting of the Myon family is a testament to the power of hope and resilience, which is very uncommon in the stories that we tell. Despite the darkness that they faced, they found strength and reclaimed the homes and their lives.
Hey there, listeners. If you're enjoying our spine-chilling stories, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more of these captivating tales. And don't forget to share our podcast with friends and family who love a good scare. Also, check out another podcast hosted by Bert and his buddy Nick called Deceptive Reality. Every Friday, they take a different unsolved mystery and do a deep dive into it, uncovering new details and theories. If you're fascinated by the unknown and enjoy unraveling mysteries, be sure to tune in. You won't want to miss their in-depth investigations into some of the most perplexing cases out there.
Well, everybody, like you just heard, I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Also, wherever you're listening to your podcast, like she just said, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Let us know we're doing a good job. Share our podcast with whoever you know is into this kind of storytelling. Can't wait until we go to the next one, and I can't wait to tell your story. Until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.